far as I can tell, there are 3 F1 drivers immediately headed for the chopping block, and neither having money, or politics, or being a Viking can save them. All the while, 2 of those things were enough to keep Lance Stroll's hand in the game. Hang on a minute, why isn't Bottas on this list too, Law? Well, it's mainly down to him having at least a chance at Sauber or Williams on the grounds that supposedly Audi might want to keep him around. You know, given that Carlos Sainz has seemingly gotten into bed with Flavio Briatore, and I apologise for that mental image in advance. Or the Finn could go back to Williams in order to give them a safe pair of hands after dropping Logan Sargent. And he's not in this video either, because I've already covered him in this video up top that you can watch at your leisure. For these 3 drivers, their potential pathways as to them remaining in the sport are either closing, have closed, or they've simply seen the light at the end of the tunnel and accepted their supposed fate. We're going to start off with the most surprising in my opinion, and that is Zhou Guanyuand. Wait, how is this surprising? He doesn't strike anybody as someone particularly great, but oh, it's cash, isn't it, Law? We all thought that Zhou would have had a solid chance at going to Haas, but apparently that might not be the case. And it might mean that its owner, Gene Haas, might start to, well, you know, invest in his own F1 team properly? This is no dig at Zhou Guanyuand specifically. He's a nice guy, he has an excellent taste in fashion. It's just the relationship with him and Alfa Romeo / Sauber, it's a complicated one. Granted, his $30 to $35 million a year in terms of Chinese sponsorship money hasn't gone unnoticed, and I'm sure that Alfa Romeo has appreciated somewhat, especially when it comes to new car registrations in China, which between 2022 and 2023 went up by 94%. In regards to his driving ability, he isn't the absolute worst driver out there, and the downtick in his performance in recent races where we saw him mostly start last has seemingly been resolved with an issue with the chassis, and a reversion back to a pre-Imola spec has seemingly done the trick with him either back on Valtteri's tail or slightly ahead of the Finn. It just goes to show that just upgrading your car willy-nilly, it might do more harm than good. As we've seen with Alpine, they barely touched the car and they've risen from 10th in the constructors to 7th. 7th! Be that as it may, in recent days, it's become increasingly clear that Zhou's time in F1 may be at an end, simply down to the doors closing in front of him, which looked like really viable options. I mean, we all knew that Sauber wasn't going to keep him around and extend his contract because Andreas Seidel, the CEO of Sauber / Audi, is not really interested in keeping Zhou. It's not part of Audi's grand plan. There were talks about maybe him going to Alpine because he was part of their academy back in the day, and of course maybe Haas because they wouldn't say no to a pretty penny, as we've seen in recent history. But in the space of the last couple of weeks, the odds of him going to either of those 2 teams have drastically lengthened. The Alpine one is quite obvious as their new team boss, Briatore. Yes, I am aware that he's there on Renault's behest as an executive advisor, but come on. With all of the headlines that he's been generating over the past week, he's effectively become the new team principal in all but name. Bruno Famin, I've not heard hide nor hair from the guy since the announcement of the Italian coming back into the Enston fold. Seriously, have you heard from Bruno Famin lately? Is he doing alright? At the moment, Briatore is openly debating choosing from either Mick Schumacher because of his commitment to the WC project and his Mercedes connection for a possible engine deal / discount, Jack Doohan on the grounds that Flavio is his manager and would boost the credentials of the Alpine Academy, and of course correct all of the mistakes that were generated from the Piastri debacle, and most notably and recently, Carlos Sainz, who's now come into the picture at Alpine, going back there after his tenure a few years ago, and practically gazumping Williams right at the last minute when it all looked really clear that James Vowles was going to realise his dream because he was practically gushing about it during the Spanish Grand Prix. 3 drivers ahead of Zhou? I don't think it's likely at Alpine anymore, so surely the next best thing would be going to Haas, right? I mean, they could do with the money, right? And Gene Haas has said himself that he would like to extend his company's reach into Chinese markets, and having a Chinese driver would be great for business, right? Well, according to the new team principal of Haas, no. Seriously? You think they would, given that they have had to refund the Mazepin company's $13 million sponsorship monies from 2021. However, according to Ayo Komatsu in an interview with The Race, that might not be the case. As he says right here, even if a driver brings some financial package, if that costs you 1 or 2 championship positions, that can just completely wipe it out. The money a driver brings is not a factor whatsoever with us. Gene has money. Wow. Now that is interesting and also kind of untrue. Since I am certain that Ferrari will be paying Haas something for taking on Oliver Behrman for 2025, since that's what they did for Mick Schumacher back in the day when he was part of the Ferrari Driver Academy. According to various sources, Ferrari was subsidizing half of Mick's salary for that year. Sure, it's not exactly millions of dollars, but when you consider that Haas sometimes goes into extreme penny pinching to the point where they shrunk their pit wall just to save $250,000, that kind of subsidy would not go unnoticed or unappreciated. But what this tells me is that on the grounds of just having plenty of cash and tens of millions of dollars of sponsorship money, that Zhou Guanyuand is not a guarantee for that seat at Haas anymore. Komatsu is now looking for a driver that is purely able to impress in terms of performance, as well as gelling well with a rookie. If Zhou comes in and doesn't deliver and Haas end up last again, then that's prize money handed over to another team. Tens of millions. Another thing that's saying to me that Gene Haas is more inclined to spend more time and money on his F1 team, finally, is that he has been busy selling up some of his charters for his Stuart Haas NASCAR operation. That's tens of millions of dollars right there, now back in his pocket, that he can use to invest in the Formula One team. He has kept a couple of those charters for a brand new NASCAR project, but still, he's been able to generate a bit more cash, and also there's bin some months for Io Komatsu to be able to make more efficient the stuff that Haas already has, instead of what Steiner would have liked to have done, is just spend cash for the sake of spending cash, without really going into further detail as to what can be just tweaked or just refreshed a little bit. But at the same time though, it was kind of depressing at the time because they were last and they needed more investment like Williams had, but given that they've still been able to be competitive and go for 7th place in the Constructors already, without any obvious signs of really vigorous improvement, that's not bad. Komatsu's done a good job in terms of efficiency. It could mean some capital's unlocked for the F1 team, since that's been his main priority, and it's only increased as the team survived 2020, and F1's profile's now closing up on NASCAR's in America. But it does still have some ways to go yet. So it's become quite clear to me that everyone thinking that Zhou Guanyuand will go to Haas just for the fact that he has lots of money, that's not a guarantee anymore, and that's probably it for the Chinese driver. It's a real shame, but I am glad that he got to live out his dream of racing in Formula One at the Shanghai International Circuit. But it's quite clear that whoever gets to drive alongside Oliver Behrman will need to be a very experienced driver who doesn't necessarily have to bring lots of cash, and has to really do well and be a worthy replacement to Nico Hülkenberg. They are going to be missing Nico terribly. They absolutely loved having him there because he was the bastion of hope last year and saved them from having far fewer points because the other driver who's at Haas seemed completely and utterly lost. And he is the next subject for today's video. That being, of course, Kevin Magnussen. In the case of the Dane, the writing is on the wall by his own admission. Of course, he isn't giving up on staying in F1 with him saying that he is an active participant in the driver market, and he is talking to other teams. But that isn't really saying much because that's the case for anybody whose contract is up at the end of the year. If you weren't active in the driver market right now and you were still looking for a drive, and you'd be extremely and utterly cocky thinking that the team that has you currently would want to keep you without you even having to try anything or lift a finger. But as I discussed just now with Zhou Guanyuand, they need a driver to partner up with Behrman who is going to be a very talented and worthwhile leader. And so far, Kevin Magnussen has not shown that, because he seems quite aimless, directionless, he's been racking up penalty points, and he's actively said that he's not here to babysit rookies. And that's exactly what Haas want to do. They want to nurture Oliver Behrman and really embolden their Ferrari relationship. And that kind of word from Kevin tells me that, yeah, he's not fully committed to being just a teacher. But at the same time, he still wants to work with the team because he has been quite glowing with Io Komatsu, him saying that he fully appreciates the words of the former engineer technical head, saying that he is honest and he's straightforward, unlike the previous boss, so that's a little dig at Steiner there. But at the same time, Kevin Magnussen is a product of the Gunther Steiner era, and right now it's quite obvious that Haas is looking to purge almost every single trace of Gunther Steiner that they possibly can. What's becoming quite clear is that Haas is starting to regenerate itself into a more professional and serious team, not the situation that we've had for the longest time that Drive to Survive has only manifested and perpetuated. That they want to be seen as a slick, serious team, professional, and a worthwhile American team that can fend off Andretti, because that threat is not going away, it's only intensifying growing with every single month and every single race and every single bit of press release that Michael Andretti spews out. Not to mention they want to regain their competitive edge that they had back in 2018. Another indicator that Kevin is pragmatic about his impending second departure from F1 is that he is openly admitting that he feels quite empty at the moment, being part of the midfield and having never really had a chance of being at the top tier. And I wouldn't blame him, honestly, because in a way, he's right. He's never been at a team which has really been competitive for points, podiums, wins on the regular. McLaren used to be a couple of years before he became their 2014 second driver to Jenson Button, but that was at the beginning of their descent into the dark ages. So right team, wrong time. But before Fernando Alonso made it cool. And after the whirlwind year that was 2022, when he was brought back into the sport after sitting out the previous year, and quite frankly that was an act of mercy on Steiner's part, that year saw real highs for the Dane. He came back in, he immediately got 5th place, it was such a comeback, a Viking comeback as it were, and then he got the team's first and only pole position thus far. Sure, the Brazilian Grand Prix of 2022 was an absolute hectic minefield with changeable weather conditions, but as many people have said about various things across human history, you've got to be in it to win it. And they were in it, and they won it. But that gusto has seemingly faded away through a disappointing 2023 campaign, which saw Kevin Magnussen crash, fall really short compared to Nico Hülkenberg, and this year it's really not shown much difference, with Kevin Magnussen sort of being passive-aggressive when it comes to being a team player, having to take team orders, holding up drivers, so that means Nico can score some points, and then of course, as we all know, he's been racking up penalty points himself. The wrong kind of points, mate. And for the longest time we thought, oh, okay, Kevin's just fallen off or he's not taking things seriously. Monaco, Miami, I gave him absolute flack for ruining Logan Sargent's race, causing a horrific crash at the Monaco Grand Prix, which took out his teammate and Sergio Perez, even though Sergio Perez wouldn't have been able to do much from 18th. But still, we all thought it was just him completely losing his skill. But no, it's quite clear that given the situation and all the talk that Kevin Magnussen has been saying lately, that he is looking elsewhere, he's not expecting to be in F1 next year, so you know what he's thinking? I'm going to have fun, I'm going to hustle Lewis Hamilton if I want to for some points, and I'm going to just go for every single gap that I can because it's a laugh. Why not? Why not? And okay, from that point of view, with that context and that mindset, okay, it's still reckless and irresponsible, but at least there's a viable reason instead of him just running out of skill. But Kevin seems to be quite content with perhaps not continuing in F1 next year and seeing departing it as not an admission of defeat. But on the contrary, he's quite hopeful and that he can use his experience and presence in the sport to his advantage in other series. And as people said in my Logan Sargent video from the other day, they could easily see Kevin Magnussen as a really solid and competent IndyCar driver. And it's not like he hasn't tried IndyCar before. Back in 2021, he did sub in at Aaron McLaren, and he did actually show some competitive streaks, and a mechanical failure did curtail his race efforts, but, you know, he didn't disgrace himself. And if Romain Grosjean sticks around in 2025, we might see the two reuniting. And if you look back to 2021, Kevin wasn't sitting idle on the side. He was starting a promising career in IMSA, winning the Detroit outing, as well as getting a chance to do Le Mans with his dad. I'm not particularly worried about the future of Kevin Magnussen. He seems quite composed, together. He's a dad now, and speaking as a newly minted father myself, it does change your perspective on things in life. And he's looking to do other things. And in a way, the way he's talking, saying that he's only 31 years old, he's still got plenty of juice in the tank in terms of his motorsport career, he's just employing the same strategic mindset that Max Verstappen is spewing, that he's still young, and yeah, he likes Formula 1, but if he no longer enjoys the sport, he wants to use the remaining time of his youth to go and try out other pursuits and other categories. And what we've seen is that Magnussen is a dab hand when it comes to endurance racing, and we probably will see, maybe, one day at Le Mans, Magnussen and Verstappen competing at Le Mans or in World Endurance, and them actually jostling it out for some victories, perhaps. He's either going to be going off to do that, or he's going to go and do IndyCar. We might see Kevin Magnussen do well and maybe win the Indy 500, and if he does, good on him. And in a way, it doesn't really matter which series he chooses, because they're both going through an effective renaissance at the moment. IndyCar's going through things, World Endurance is more popular than ever. Yeah, I think Kevin's good. Okay, you've been patient or you've scrolled forward to find out what I have to say about Daniel Ricciardo, and put simply, he's become a tool. Before you type in the comments, I am not talking about his driving ability. I'm just talking about the circumstances and the situation going on behind the scenes at Red Bull Racing. Because as I've been recording this video, Jos Verstappen has come out saying that Christian Horner effectively barred him from running an RB8 car in a demonstration event, and you're just thinking, is it really getting that petty? All of the backroom politics at Red Bull, and now Daniel Ricciardo has become yet another pawn when we thought he was all done and dusted, that he wasn't going to get the Red Bull gig, he could then maybe settle in a Racing Bulls, and then suddenly he can't do that anymore because now Marco and Horner are going at each other's throats again, and now the shareholders are involved. It's getting messy again. Given the recent news about Liam Lawson, I reckon that the tension between Helmut Marko and Christian Horner is set to kick off again after it being tempered somewhat. All of this to do with the cessation of talks with Carlos Sainz that Helmut Marko had brokered, almost got across the line, but then Christian Horner got involved, supposedly, and then put an end to all of that, and therefore signed on Sergio Perez for another couple of years because Horner wanted stability and continuity. And then, of course, he's been humbled by the fact that Sergio has now fallen off again, unfortunately. Hey, no disrespect to Checo either. He and his team were able to really do well in brokering that deal. Fair play to them. And then, of course, there's the sponsorship money attached to Checo. So in a way, based on the comments from Komatsu, Haas has more financial integrity than Red Bull. How things have changed in 3 years. It seems like Dr. Marko isn't giving up without a fight though, and he's now been on the warpath again by talking up a storm in regards to Daniel Ricciardo, as well as Liam Lawson, as well as the direction of the second Red Bull team itself. During the course of this year, and even going back as early as last year, the direction of the second team, formerly known as AlphaTauri and then formerly known as Toro Rosso, would be them eschewing their previous identity of being just a junior team and instead just be a team in its own right, be competitive, and go after 5th place in the Constructors. And all of this was the edict and at the behest of the shareholders of both parties, Red Bull and AlphaTauri. And of course, you don't want to anger the shareholders because they put in a lot of money to your project, but no. According to Dr. Marko, whether or not this is true remains to be seen, but now the shareholders aren't saying that anymore. They want to remind people that it's a junior team, and so therefore, Liam Lawson should be given a chance and Daniel Ricciardo should be seen the exit. Perhaps Ricciardo's sponsorship clout isn't as potent as it once was, now that the supposed pathway back to the top team has been closed off by Horner. And this isn't really helped by the fact that Dr. Marko says one thing about Liam Lawson, saying he's guaranteed a seat for 2025, and then Christian Horner says, oh, we've got nothing preordained for Liam next year, he just has to be a reserve driver, we hope to get him something one day, but there's not a guarantee. And of course, they do have an option on Liam. They either put him in a Red Bull driven car next year, or he's free to look at other teams. And right now, the rumours are saying that he is in serious discussions, early discussions, with Sauber / Audi, and Hülkenberg and Lawson. That would be a really potent lineup if Audi are able to kick on and do fairly well. It's quite clear that Dr. Marko does not want that to happen, because right at the moment, in terms of the Red Bull Junior team, which he is the head of, Liam Lawson is the most likely candidate after Yuki Tsunoda to get into F1 full-time, because he's already proven himself in many races. He's scored points, and he's actually held himself quite well amongst other drivers. So if they do lose Lawson, the next viable option at the moment is Isaac Hadjar. And sure, in F2, he is really potent. But in terms of his anger management and temper, he's worse than Yuki Tsunoda. And that is saying something. Marko would be loath to lose Lawson after all of the years that the program has ploughed into his development, and of course money. Now, as far as Daniel Ricciardo is concerned, he doesn't really care about any of this, and why should he? He's doing the job as far as he is concerned. He's not really paying attention to what's being said behind the scenes. He just wants to get on and do the business for the team as best as he can. And fair play to him, the last couple of races, he has done better than Yuki Tsunoda, he's had more good fortune, and sure, at the Spanish Grand Prix he didn't score, but he did do a fair bit better than Yuki, and he had the better pit strategy, because Yuki's 3-stop strategy, my goodness, that did not work at all. And Racing Bulls are now subject to the issue that Aston Martin had, and Williams had, and in a way Red Bull have had, actually, that upgrades don't necessarily make the car much better. So yeah, that's something that they have to consider as well. Ricciardo has not been disgracing himself as of late. And in a way, this whole situation is something that Daniel Ricciardo just can't control. If the shareholders want a junior driver in the car, then It'll probably happen, regardless of what Christian Horner wants. You go against the shareholders at your peril. Right now, racing bulls are having an identity crisis in not just having a really weird and corporate name, but in also what they want to be. A few months ago, I'd accepted the fact they wanted to be a competitive team in their own right, and field the best drivers that they possibly could get amongst their own Red Bull fold, or maybe outside of their program, as we saw with Checo. But now they're sort of going back on what they just said, because they're realizing that that's not bringing results. And going back to Komatsu's quote about saying, if you get the wrong driver in terms of bringing money to the team, it could cost you a couple of places in the championship standings. If that turns out to be the case, and Daniel Ricciardo falls off entirely, and it costs them 5th place in the Constructors, and if Alpine can just float their way back up to 6th place in the Constructors simply by doing nothing in terms of upgrades other than saving weight, and bringing careful and methodical upgrades and improving their technical structure, then, yeah, Daniel Ricciardo might have cost them a couple of tens of millions of dollars, and that would be going against all of the efforts that he did last year, at Mexico especially. He managed to bring them up from 10th place to 8th, and then effectively give them back $20 million. Perhaps there's internal frustration going on Red Bull, with many people questioning the decision to keep Checo for 2 years. Okay, technically 1 + 1. And at the same time, I get the feeling now that Dietrich Mateschitz is gone, Christian Horner is making the most of this opportunity to transform Red Bull Racing into his team exclusively, and make it just Ardent International 2.0, which he's still technically a part owner of with his father Gary Horner. But if you look to what Ardent International is doing right now, their prestige, where they were in Formula 3000 and GP2, it's slumped hard. The only competitive series they're in at the moment are GB3 and GB4, and those are effectively British Formula 3 and British Formula 4. It seems to be very much a grassroots operation now, instead of being a very competitive and compelling junior outfit like Prema, Carlin, ART. It's not that anymore. But maybe with Red Bull and the Red Bull Junior team, maybe that's what he might want, just an Ardent International with Red Bull colours. So if what I'm saying is true, and the shareholders are recognising that Daniel Ricciardo's stumbling around and potential lack of improvement might compromise their position and losing out on tens of millions of dollars of prize money that they themselves don't have to spend to make the team better, they'll be less enthused to go for an all-out competitive streak and instead just go, you know what, maybe we should save on driver salaries and just bring up the junior drivers and just go back to what was originally working. Oh, okay. No disrespect to Daniel, though. He's not really got much control in this other than just do the best that he can. And he's recognising that, and he's not letting that get the better of him, unlike Checo, because Ricciardo with Marco, he doesn't care what Marco thinks. And according to him right now, there is no ultimatum going on, but things could easily change. Much like how things could change for Alpine's good fortune in the wake of re-signing Gasly for 2025, and the knock-on effect of that decision for their second driver. Something that I touch upon in this video here that you can go and watch straight away. I'll see you over there.